Y ahora continuamos hablando sobre los momentos constitucionales reales y aparentes creados por el populismo. Y tenemos un invitado muy especial, es el profesor Richard Albert de la Universidad de Texas. Professor, welcome to the Second Regional Congress of the Administrative Jurisdiction of the Colombian Caribbean. It is an honor to have you with us. Professor, during your intervention, we will have a simultaneous translation for the attendees of this event. I would like to respectfully ask you to speak slowly. Once again, welcome.
Thank you so very much for your invitation. I'm thrilled to be here. Can you hear me? Can the translator hear me correctly? Yes? Am I audible? You can hear me?
Yes, Professor, we are listening to you perfectly.
Thank you so very much for inviting me, and congratulations on convening this important gathering. I had the pleasure of attending this gathering in person last year, and I hope to be able to return in person next year. But for now, I'm going to be with you virtually. There's no subject more important than the one that brings us together here at this very important international conference. The subject of the conference really is democracy. And if we take a moment to look back over the past generation about the state of democracy, I think we'll have reason to be concerned, because democracy has declined every year since 2006. And the world is now in the midst of a democratic recession. Unfortunately, this trend shows no sign of reversal. On the contrary, the global decline in democracy is growing steeper and faster. The result is that today only 6.4% of the world lives in a full democracy. It turns out that dictatorships today are far more populous than democracies. Dictatorships today govern 70% of the world, which means that we're back to the lowest levels of democratic governance worldwide since 1989. That's before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so sadly for the world and for us all, the verdict is undeniable, which is that democracy is losing all over the globe. That's why this international conference is so important. This international conference is an opportunity to brainstorm ideas on how to protect democracy. It's an opportunity for us to plan how to promote human rights in the region and in the world. And it's an opportunity to strengthen the global network of defenders of democracy. As scholars and judges, each of us, all of us gathered here, we focus our attention on how to rescue democracy. Over the course of the conference thus far, we've discussed one of the key problems of our time, which is the problem of abusive constitutionalism, as defined by my colleague David Landau. As he explains, the core problem is that it's fairly easy to construct a regime that looks democratic, but in actuality is not fully democratic. There have been solutions proposed to the problem of abusive constitutionalism, but really they're hard to find and hard to implement, because it's possible for authoritarians to lawfully and constitutionally use the mechanisms of constitutional change to make the state much less democratic than it was before. These kinds of changes that we see authoritarians making around the world, drawing upon the power of populism, these kinds of changes, they slice so deeply into the heart of the Constitution that we can't call them mere amendments to the Constitution. They're more than constitutional amendments. We have to call them constitutional dismemberments because they do violence to one or more of the Constitution's essential features, namely, for example, its fundamental rights, or its basic structure, or a core feature of its identity. And so these kinds of changes that really destroy the heart of the Constitution, we need to figure out how to spot them, how to stop them. This is what my colleague Kim Lane Shepley describes as autocratic legalism. And so here we are this week building together academic resources to identify threats to constitutionalism, to identify solutions to defeat authoritarianism, and to try to build safeguards for democracy. That is our charge as scholars of democracy and human rights. Now, fortunately, political actors are responding just as we scholars and judges are responding. There are multinational and supranational efforts underway to protect democracy. There's a new Summit for Democracy and associated initiatives that are sending strong signals to autocrats around the world that democratic leaders are joining forces to take steps toward global democratic renewal. And so I'm bringing you what I hope is happy news, which is that despite the historic decline in democracy around the world, we are fighting back, both as scholars on the one hand and as judges and political actors on the other. We can take some comfort that all is not lost, that there is good news and that there is hope for democracy. There's hope for another reason, too. There's hope because of modern efforts to bring peace and reconciliation to people oppressed all around the world. This is a crucial challenge for Democrats. The challenge is how to reconcile with our past, how to bring justice to those who have been denied justice for far too long. In recent years, these efforts at reconciliation have focused on constitutional reform all around the world. In fact, the most important moments in constitutional reform in recent history have been efforts at constitutional reconciliation. The three most important constitutional reform efforts in recent years have occurred in Chile, in Australia, and in Barbados. In Chile, there was an effort to write a new constitution. The new constitution sought to promote indigenous rights and recognition. This was a key effort, that constitutional reconciliation. Now, the effort failed, but the mission, the objective was one, I think, quite laudable and one that came close to realization. And so there's great support for the movement to constitutional reconciliation. In Australia, not too long ago, there was an effort to amend the Constitution to insert into the Constitution a voice to Parliament for Indigenous peoples. Again, an effort at constitutional reconciliation. That effort failed as well. But the mission is one that we saw, many of us saw, as laudable, as worth pursuing. And finally, in Barbados, the third of three examples that to me make up the three most important efforts at constitutional reform over the past few years. In Barbados, there was a successful constitutional amendment, and the amendment sought to replace the imperial king of the United Kingdom with a democratic president. Again, an effort at constitutional reconciliation in Barbados. Now, some of these efforts failed, some of these efforts succeeded, but there was nonetheless, I think, victory in all three cases, because the important point is that these efforts were made in the first place. These three cases also share something else in common. What they share in common is that they are illustrations of what I describe as decolonial constitutionalism, decolonial constitutionalism. Colonial constitutionalism is the use of legal, legitimate, and non-violent means to assert sovereignty, to secure rights, or to achieve recognition for a people, nation, or state that is legally or politically subordinate to domestic or foreign actors. That is decolonial constitutionalism. It's the new model of constitutional reconciliation that has replaced the old model of constitutional revolution. So that's what I want to spend the rest of my time this morning discussing. The new model of decolonial constitutionalism. Now, what's the old model? The old model of constitutional revolution is evident in the United States. There, the American Declaration of Independence sparked the first successful decolonial movement in the modern world. America went from colony to sovereign state and then to great power. And in the process, the United States demonstrated for subordinated peoples all around the world how to launch and how to win their own battles for sovereignty. The American model was quite prominent around the world soon after the United States secured its victory. But something happened after the end of the Second World War. America's 18th century precedent of revolutionary self-determination was no longer the prevailing path to decolonization. What happened was that the traditional war-making toolkit for independence, revolution, illegality, and violence, those have been replaced by more orderly methods that are consonant with the rule of law. Evolution, lawfulness, and continuity. These are the touchstones in the new global model of decolonial constitutionalism. That's the model that today lights the path to self-determination. These tactics that undergird decolonial constitutionalism, they're legal, they're legitimate, they're levers of constitutional power that are available in all jurisdictions to liberate subordinated peoples all around the world. Now, the difference between breaking from a colonial arrangement in the present day versus in the age of revolution 2 centuries ago, that highlights, I think, the essential teaching of decolonial constitutionalism, which is that what was once achievable by revolutionary means alone today can be won with non-violent systems and lawyerly discipline. And so decolonial constitutionalism, just to restate the definition, is the use of legal and legitimate and non-violent means to assert sovereignty, to secure rights, or to achieve recognition for a people, for a nation, or for a state that is legally or politically subordinate to domestic or foreign actors. I am involved right now in a process of decolonial constitutionalism, and I want to tell you a bit about it. Not too long ago in Jamaica, the Prime Minister convened a committee of politicians, civil society leaders, and international persons, including me, convened a constitutional reform committee to provide expert guidance and oversight to the government and the people of Jamaica during the constitutional reform process. Now, the purpose of the constitutional reform process in Jamaica is to do what Barbados did. Barbados, you recall, transformed its constitution from a constitutional monarchy to a parliamentary republic with a homegrown head of state. Right now in Jamaica, the head of state is not a locally chosen person. The head of state in Jamaica today is King Charles III. He's not the King of England in Jamaica. He's the King of Jamaica. So he is currently the head of state because of the system of governance that defines the Constitution of Jamaica. And so the effort toward constitutional decolonization in Jamaica is to transform the system of government such that the head of state will no longer be King Charles III, but rather be someone chosen in Jamaica by Jamaicans themselves. And so Jamaica has embarked on this very exciting path toward decolonizing its constitution. The task is going to be difficult, however, because transforming the system of government in Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy to a parliamentary republic requires a high degree of approval, not just among parliamentarians, but also among the people. Supermajority approval in the legislature, as well as popular majority approval in a referendum. And so what's fascinating, I think, is that in Jamaica, there's no experience with referendums under the current constitution. So this will be the very first time that the people of Jamaica vote in a referendum on how they wish to define and redefine themselves through their constitution. The challenge will be winning the referendum. One, because there's no experience with referendums under the current constitution in Jamaica. And so the challenge is not just winning the referendum, it's learning how to do referendums. It's informing the people about how a referendum works, providing them with the tools necessary to vote in an informed way. Even in the best of times, amendment referendums are difficult to ratify. They actually succeed 94% of the time when they're used to enact a new constitution, but they fail 40% of the time when they're used to enact a constitutional amendment. And so that's what I mean when I refer to the challenge of winning the referendum. It's twofold. One, it's introducing the people to this idea, the concept of a referendum and how it works, whether we can trust it. But the second is just the track record of failure that we see around the world when it comes to amendment referendums. 40% of amendment referendums around the world fail. And so it's in this context that the Prime Minister of Jamaica and the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs together established the Constitutional Reform Committee in March 2023. The group is 15 persons, and the group is composed of political actors representing the government, actors representing the opposition. There are leaders in civil society, persons representing faith institutions, for example. There's a youth representative. There's a national constitutional expert, and there's an international constitutional expert. I am representing the latter, and so I'm one of the 15 persons on the committee, the only non-Jamaican on the committee. And I've been invited to participate in this process as a member of the committee, drawing from my international expertise in constitutional reform and constitution making. It's been quite fascinating to be in the room discussing how to reform the Constitution, the timing of the reform of the Constitution, as well as the stakes involved in the reform of the Constitution. What will interest you is that the process of constitutional reform in Jamaica is following an innovative three-phased approach designed to achieve the prime directive of creating the Republic of Jamaica. In the first phase, the committee is reviewing the Constitution to package together reforms that may be enacted using the referendum. We've talked about the referendum before. So all changes that can be made only with recourse to a referendum, all of those are packaged in the first phase. Then the referendum will be held. In the second phase, there will be a review of the rights, the freedoms in the Constitution. And then in the third phase, there will be an effort to enact an entirely new constitution for the now Republic of Jamaica. And so it's an innovative three-phased approach that follows, I think, quite closely the values of the rule of law. predictability, transparency, notice, and a rule-based approach to reform, rather than what we see historically when it comes to major reforms of a constitution, which is typically something that is seeded by some kind of chaotic seismic moment in the life of the state, where the outcome is not clear. In this particular case, there's no seismic, chaotic moment that triggered the plan to reform the Constitution of Jamaica. No, it was done all from the very beginning in an orderly way. And that, I think, is why I am drawing some comfort from the process itself. Why I think there's great hope that it will ultimately succeed, even though in the history of Caribbean constitutional reform, what we've seen is just as much failure as there has been success, if not perhaps more failure than success. But I'm optimistic about this particular phase. The committee just released, not too long ago, its first set of recommendations in a major report. The report urges the country to take this historic step in the project of constitutional decolonization. What I want to share with you now is the key part of the report that the committee issued not too long ago. Here's the key part. The committee stated that a constitution is something very special. A constitution draws its legitimacy from the collective will and collective vision of the people that it serves. And so therefore, the committee declared quite emphatically that a constitution should be a reflection of the will of the people. This, I think, is quite extraordinary for a Caribbean constitutional jurisdiction, quite extraordinary comment for a Caribbean constitutional jurisdiction to make, given that the history of not just this country, but many Commonwealth Caribbean constitutional democracies is rooted in constitutional monarchy, where the will of the people does not govern. So this itself is a revolutionary point, a revolutionary transformation of the very constitutional order of Jamaica, to go from a system of government where the king rules above all, to one where the people rule themselves and where they choose who their leaders are, specifically their head of state. And so drawing from this people-centric understanding of the Constitution in Jamaica and fully in line with a decolonial vision of a constitution, the Constitutional Reform Committee of Jamaica recommends that there should be a new higher law enacted, by the Parliament of Jamaica and approved by the people of Jamaica. This higher law would repeal and replace the British imperial instrument that brought the Constitution of Jamaica into force. Because here's the very interesting part, perhaps the shocking part for all of you, for all of us, which is that the Constitution of Jamaica is not really a constitution in the way that you're thinking of it in your mind. The Constitution of Jamaica, enacted in 1962, is an order in council that was issued at Buckingham Palace in 1962. That's not the kind of document, the kind of people-centric creation that we associate with a constitution. But that is the current state of democratic constitutionalism in Jamaica, which is that the people have not written their own constitution. They have not enacted it themselves in Jamaican institutions, nor can it be said that the Constitution of Jamaica today rests on the consent of the governed, on the will of the people. And so the project, the mission, the objective of the Constitutional Reform Committee of Jamaica is to do just that, is to transform the Constitution from one that is rooted abroad in institutions legitimated abroad to one that is anchored in Jamaica and anchored in institutions created by Jamaicans, for Jamaicans, and of Jamaicans themselves. And so this, I hope, is going to be a process that yields great success, not just in terms of the outcome of generating a new Republican constitution, but in creating a new connection between the people themselves and their democracy, the people themselves and their constitution, the people themselves and their government. When we create a Republican form of government in Jamaica, when the people authorize its creation, that I think will be a great victory for decolonial constitutionalism. Great evidence that the project of oppressed people, either oppressed under law or politics, oppressed people are still standing up, asserting themselves, asserting their rights, asserting their sovereignty within the confines of the rule of law, no longer following the old model of chaotic constitutional revolution, but instead following the law-based process of constitutional renewal that really defines the heart of decolonial constitutionalism. Let me pause now. I have been invited to speak for 30 minutes. I think I've spoken for about 27, 28 minutes. I will pause now just to say thank you. Thank you so very much for inviting me to join you today in this conversation. I wish I could be there in person. I was there last year in person. I hope to be there with you next year in person as well. And let me also say that I want to thank the translator for helping me communicate with you this morning, but I'm currently learning Spanish. And so I hope that next year when I'm there in person, I'll be able to make some remarks in Spanish such that I won't need a translator for all of my remarks to you. Thank you to Jean-Paul Vasquez Gomez for curating this marvelous event. Thank you to everyone involved, all of the organizers. Congratulations, and it's a pleasure to be with you virtually. I look forward to seeing you in person. I look forward to following the rest of the program online if I can. Thank you so very much.